over the first fortnight of this new normal that we're all living in, this new sort of hopefully temporary world we're living in, there's definitely a bit of you kind of freeze when you start thinking about sport a little bit. It's actually kind of hard to think about sport in a coherent manner, and I don't know what the reason for that is. Like, I think you and I are both lucky enough that we haven't seen firsthand how horrifying the current situation is around the world, thankfully, and you kind of touch wood on that. But yet there was kind of a reluctance, or I don't even know what the emotion was, but it's certainly a little bit difficult to sort of think about it. It was kind of felt very, very unimportant. I think that's kind of been broken down a little bit over the last couple of weeks, because it's exhausting thinking about what is happening in the world right now. It is exhausting to not actually have the outlet of sport, which a lot of people tend to have in terms of taking their mind off things. And it's obviously not just taking the mind off it for a lot of people during regular times. So I think that that's kind of been broken down over the last couple of days, hasn't it? That it's actually like, people shouldn't be demonized for thinking about sport. People should have the ability to think about this thing while also accepting that there is bigger issues in the world right now.
Yeah, I think the whole notion that anybody's going to be demonized for anything at the moment, maybe we can all just cool the jets on that and have conversations about what's happening, as opposed to the old school traditional rows that everything evolved into, because they haven't really served us very well as a society, have they? I think, even apart from on the philosophical level that you're speaking about, on a very practical level, sports are starting to think, how could we play a role at the at the end of this? If the curve eventually gets flattened, which it will do, because every government around the world is starting to take it seriously, or certainly at local levels, even in places where federal governments aren't taking it seriously, the curve will flatten eventually, right? And at that point, there needs to be some plan in place, and there needs to be some shared vision of what the future would look like. English football, obviously, yesterday, or Miguel Delaney's story had one, and we're starting to see conversations happen about what a GAA future might look like. And we'll get to some of the other stories about GAA in the papers, but there's one on the back of the Indo this morning, where the county chairman of Wexford is suggesting that maybe the club championship could return before the inter-county championship. Now, there was a big debate yesterday on Twitter after a columnist said that, like, let's ditch the inter-county season and play the club season, and essentially, it'll be a truncated year. Let's give it over to the club and see what it would look like. And from a philosophical point of view, you can see why people who are big fans of the club game, returning the game to the grassroots, might get behind an idea like that. From a practical perspective, there's no money really involved in that, and the organisation needs money centrally to feed the army of coaches that it has around the country that are actually very important in terms of the engine of actually growing the sport in schools and keeping it going in clubs. Because the sponsors obviously don't rally behind. There's one sponsor for the club championship. There's 6 for the 2 inter-county championships, and obviously gate attendance would be a massive income for the inter-county game. But do we really think that there's going to be like a free for all in GAA grounds in July and August and potentially September, or is social distancing now the new norm? So that's kind of part. It seems that that's behind the thinking of the county board chairman, saying there'll be smaller crowds at these games anyway, much more manageable for an organisation to monitor that and to steward those games and all that kind of stuff. So, like, there's some internal logic to the notion of playing the club season first. I don't think the Wexford chairman's idea is to get rid of the inter-county game at all. It's just play the club game first, ease our way back into that, see how that works, and then ramp it up as the year goes on.
Potentially, yeah. Like, I certainly read it kind of the other way, that the club season would become the important thing, and if you get the county game played, then you get it played. Like, is it a situation that we now enter into almost a month that April would have been, that you enter into a club month to ease Gaelic games back into our lives potentially? Maybe. Like, I think the idea of the GAA just ditching the inter-county season, or actually putting the club first this year, is fanciful at best, and I don't think it's actually a very good idea either to just ditch the intercounty season. And I know nobody's actually saying to ditch the intercounty season, but as you said yourself there, like, it is the financial backbone of the entire organisation. We're seeing pay cuts happening in Croke Park this week. It is hugely important. It's hugely important to all the supporters as well. Let's not forget, like, there are plenty Wexford fans who want to see their county go out this year, as well as see their club go out this year. Like, do the two things need to tic-tac perfectly? Like, could we potentially have a couple of rounds of club championship this year without county players, I dare say? Like, is that entirely off the table? Like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I mean that seems to be off the table. No one has suggested that. Certainly, the notion of there being a full league campaign without players from the club league campaign would happen at the same time as the intercounty championship. That seems to have been floated, but it's like that's a leap too far. I actually do understand the logic of what the Wexford County Board Chairman is saying, is like, ease your way back in. And if the intercounty season happens to run to October or November or December, like if every county has GAA action playing, 32 counties, club championships run off in July and August, and then after that you start the intercounty season, and it goes on for the rest of the year. And this is how we deal with 2020. And then next year you hit reset and everything goes back to the beginning. That's not the worst idea of all time, is it?
no, it's not. And I think that if you do have a plan there, that you could get the vast majority of club championships played off in the summertime and then just hand things over to the intercounty season, it definitely wouldn't be. And like, I guess also, like, I don't know, I think that if you're looking at the GA calendar, the thing you look at first is at the end, like, where does this season finish up for GA? And if it finishes up at the start of next year or at the end of this year, I can't quite remember. I think it may be the start of next year that the Senior Club All Irelands are played. So my instinct would be to kick that back to St. Patrick's Day again, go back to the old familiar place of St. Patrick's Day, kick the intercounty Football All Ireland back to the third Sunday of September again, a familiar place, but it gives the GAA an extra month. Now, if you play the club championships before that, you obviously need a hell of a lot more time, and maybe you just flip them entirely and you bring the All Ireland Club Championship to the end of September to the start of October, and once that is done, then you potentially play a 2 months, 12-week All Ireland Championship up to Christmas, which kind of sounds ridiculous, but it's totally doable. Like, I don't think too many people will be against that. It's like the last couple of years we've seen the when you get to the provincial, last year in particular, when you got to the provincial championship round and club and stuff, pitches seem to be fine. I think coming up to Christmas, the weather tends to be fine. Like, dying light is your only issue, but like, dying light happens in an All Ireland football final replay or hurling final replay if you're playing it on a Saturday night, so that's not a new problem. So, it's again, like, this, we don't have the luxury to actually say this is the correct course of action and we now have to do it. And I think that people in Croke Park, I assume that they're not wedded to any sort of tradition this year. Like, they should be looking at what the Wexford chairman is saying and thinking deeply about what he's saying and considering it as a potential option. Like, I do wonder though, Ger, like, if you take that idea on, and if you want to get something perhaps loosely planned over the next couple of weeks, and you can't follow through what the Wexford or the Wexford County Chairman is saying because of the fact that social distancing will still very much be in play come June or July, does the club championship then just get ditched because you've got a club or you've got a intercounty All Ireland coming down the tracks in 2 months after that? Like, once you set the intercounty start date, that's concrete for me. Like, you can't go moving that because the club is still going. Whereas, unfortunately, this has been the case that you can always push the club back, which I know is not fair either.
Sure, but I don't think anything's concrete. That has to be, all contingency planning at the moment has to be on the basis that nothing is concrete. And this is scenario A. Scenario A is the curve flattens. The government says, okay, we're going to start reintroducing normal life again at some level. Small gatherings of 500 people are going to be allowed, assuming that they maintain social distancing. Look, these are complete scenario planning, right? But you would think that actually, we can sell 500 tickets to any county ground, and we can have patches of people who are family members safely ensconced in a ground like that. And you think, okay, well, actually, we could play those games. And again, for the integrity of competitions, inter-county competitions, it might be no harm for everybody to have a month playing with their club and then to go back into inter-county action. So, like, I can see a graded or a graduated step up. So and after that, the government says, okay, we've crunched the numbers, and now gatherings of 1,000 are safe, and gatherings of 5,000 are safe. And suddenly, by October, inter-county football is back, and we're watching it on Saturday night and Sunday afternoons, and it's the championship. And we're playing on grounds that have been well maintained over the summertime. And actually, that's not the worst end of the year, is it?
No, absolutely not. It'll be totally fine. We all know it's the start of the year. February, March are your danger months really at the moment, and a bit of January when it comes to playing games. So the Allianz League really is the one that's always under most threat. So yeah, like if you get to a situation where people are like, yeah, you can maintain social distancing in the terraces and let's play these games. What about the players and the management then and the staff? Like if the Premier League are already considering unbelievably stringent measures to actually put people into camps this summer.
That's in June, right? They're talking about June. We're obviously not talking until July, August, September. And we're also talking about a completely different approach in Ireland. Now, the other thing that's going on here is that there was a story yesterday about Germany having developed an antibody test, and they're going to give people a certification that you have antibodies and then allow you to go back to work. So I think there's a lot of science to happen, and a lot of stuff has to catch up with what the disease is doing to people. So look, that's the complete unknown, obviously, at the moment, Owen. If people are at risk of reinfection, if we're at risk of another outbreak, then nothing happens. It's completely immoral to play sport and to subject people to that potential threat. You can't do it. Like that, at that point, it's like, okay, 2020 doesn't happen. Let's move on. Let's start planning for 2021.
For sure, yeah, that's the obvious situation. Like, and it isn't a like for like case either comparing Ireland with the UK. Like, it's obviously the way they've handled things there has been a little bit different, and I guess it is a bit like in fairness, Fergal McGill did say last week, he did mention the month of June. He said if we are up and playing by June. Now I know he's got to say that he's got to put forward the best case scenario, and they can't cancel the Allianz Leagues just yet either, because like that is also a money spinner for the GAA as well. Every single game they can play is a money spinner. So I can totally accept why that needs to be the public message put out there. But at the same time, it's there, and June has been mentioned as a potential return date. I can't see it myself, but I think July possibly on a lower scale, as you mentioned, might actually be the way forward. Like, I think a lot of people are potentially thinking about July as a potential return date for intercounty. But as you say, does the organisation go forward with that if they can't actually pack out provincial and grounds in Croke Park, for example, or Semple, or wherever these games are going to take place?
Yeah, and think about how excited we'd all be to watch some of the best club teams go up against each other. Like, it would be the perfect kind of showcasing for that level, and then slowly builds up, and the hype builds up, and everybody starts to think about what's happening next. So let me tell you about what else has gone on in the world of sport, because it is actually a busy 24 hours. UEFA are to hold a conference call tomorrow, where it's likely that Ireland's Euro 2021 playoff semi-final, is it not the Euro 2020s? Did they actually turn into Euro 2020? Anyway, will be put back until September or October due to the coronavirus pandemic. The fixture between Ireland and Slovakia is currently scheduled for early June in Bratislava. It's reported as well that the Premier League are planning to resume the season behind closed doors in May in order to finish the season by July. If they get the go-ahead from the UK government, Premier League clubs will convene remotely on Friday. Europe's clubs are determined to finish their seasons in order not to trigger huge financial rebates to broadcasters. So I'm sure the rest of Europe is looking at this as a potential model. Jack Grealish has been fined by Aston Villa with the money going to a local Birmingham hospital. The Villa captain apologised after he accepted an invitation to a friend's house despite the lockdown rules imposed by the UK government during the coronavirus pandemic. Grealish says he's deeply embarrassed by his actions and urged the public not to follow his example. We'll play that video a little bit later on. European Tour Chief Executive Keith Pelly said they're going to need clarity of the global coronavirus situation before they can begin rescheduling events. The Dubai duty-free Irish Open at Mount Juliet in May became the latest event to be postponed as a result of the pandemic. Already the Masters and the USPGA have been deferred. Tour chiefs are hopeful that the Irish Open can be rearranged. In rugby, Lions organisers have played down fears of next year's tour of South Africa overlapping with the rescheduled Olympics. The three tests with the Springboks are due to run concurrently with the Tokyo Games, but their managing director, Ben Calvely, says the 5 p.m. Irish kickoff times of the tests means Olympic action will be over by then. What a summer it's going to be, assuming everything gets back to normal. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to USA Rugby filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The association says they've taken a step as the suspension of rugby in the United States leaves them facing compounded and insurmountable financial constraints. The men's and women's national teams will continue unaffected. It is 7:45 here this morning. We're going to bring you to the sports pages right now. Then we've got our lockdown roundup, lockdown lowdown. Off the couch with Mickey Quinn, the Longford footballer, who's also a secondary school teacher, is going to talk to us about. He's been doing skills videos. He's one for us yesterday on our social channels, but he's been doing his own as well on his own social channels. Well worth checking out. Going to bring you through the football news of the day. Harry Kane, Jack Grealish, Jadon Sancho, and some Manchester United gossip. Going to play a bit of Ronan O'Gara's rivalry with David Humphreys, and a crappy quiz, a brilliant crappy quiz with one of the best questions that Owen has ever devised. There's a clip doing the rounds at the moment about who is a pub quiz, who won the 2020 whatever it is, and your man goes, "Oh, nobody won it," and then obviously he has to shout it, and the next table beside them actually ends up overhearing it. I'm spoiling it here a little bit, but actually this is a tease, Owen. In the business they call this tease. It's good, isn't it? It's a good tease, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're talking 2001.
Let's bring you through the papers.
OTB AM.
Right, we're going to start with offtheball.com. Our lead story this morning is the Ronan O'Gara and David Humphreys rivalry. This was a rivalry, Owen, that we talked about recently in the context of the Classic Game Club when we did Brian O'Driscoll's hat-trick of tries. And O'Gara starts that game, but Humphreys comes on and wins the match. Like, O'Driscoll, man of the match, but Humphreys just nails a kick from like pretty much the halfway line, puts the ball down, looks up, kicks it, and it's like with 3 minutes left on the clock to put Ireland 2 points up. So it was one of the biggest kicks of his entire career, and it was just like, yeah, no bother. But in the context of what had happened the previous year, when he'd missed a much easier kick from much closer in to beat the French for the first time in 2 decades, you're like, that was balls of steel. And this is one of the, I would say, underrated rivalries in Irish sport, because people have kind of obviously remember O'Gara versus Sexton much more, but this was a great rivalry.
It's true, isn't it, that like poor David Humphreys like completely in the shadow of Brian O'Driscoll in that game in Paris. And of course, Brian O'Driscoll puts Ireland in the position to actually win the game, but nobody remembers. Well, it's people of a certain age probably will, but I certainly had no recollection that it was Humphreys that won the game for Ireland. No recollection of this whatsoever until actually watching the game back recently, because it's known as the O'Driscoll hat-trick game. Sure, it was, and it was one of the great individual performances we've seen in Six Nations. But who wins the game for Ireland? Who actually, like, if it was football, whoever scored the winning penalty would have been remembered forever, and that would be the person that would be held up. But poor David Humphreys gets forgotten, and I think this rivalry also gets forgotten. Like, you talk about the fanfare that Sexton versus O'Gara has got. This thing is very much in the shadows compared to that.
Yeah, double media bias on that one. The other stories that we have on offtheball.com this morning, Roy Keane's looking for you. He's not happy. That's a headline on our feature interview with Danny Higginbotham that went out yesterday afternoon at 5 o'clock on all of our social channels with Joe. Best place to get that now is on youtube.com/offtheball. You can hit subscribe to that, and anytime we go live, we'll let you know. There's a couple of stories from that as well, talking about Dennis Irwin. And we also have the story that Billy Joe Saunders has had his licence suspended following his domestic violence comments. So that is the lead story on the offtheball.com website. The lead story on the back page of the Irish Independent this morning: club matches should be played before county restarts, says Wexford chief. And in it he goes on to say, could a scenario where the club championships were played off in July and August and then the inter-county resumes be looked at? I certainly think so, and I'd be suggesting it. With the restrictions on gatherings of large crowds likely to continue into the foreseeable future, Kent believes this could present an opportunity, given the national sport is more likely to be affected than its local equivalent. There are less crowds, more players impacted, and the club is at the heart of the GAA after all. So this is Derek Kent, the Wexford chairman, who's suggesting that. There's a Philly McMahon interview with Conor McKeown. Obviously always worth a read, Philly. We had him on the show last week talking about some of the issues that are raised here, talking about his business and having to lay off his staff and lay off himself. But he's also talking about the issues around mental health that are, I think, is definitely going to be something that the country needs to address, in a lockdown situation, lock-in situation like this, everybody needs to be careful about making sure they're getting exercise and speaking about what's going on. And then Brendan Irving is Ireland's boxing captain, and he has been self-isolating, having returned from the Olympic qualifiers in London in his ma's attic. I was trying to stay away from my mummy and my sister and the kids in case I was to come down with the symptoms. So he should be 14 days clear today or tomorrow. So fingers crossed he hasn't got anything like any of the Turkish boxers who ended up getting stuff there. What have you got for us, Owen?
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with Cork football boss Ronan McCarthy. McCarthy fears Kerry showdown won't be played in May. I think he's got a little bit more than just fears. He says there's no chance that the game will be played in May, and he is certainly right on that front. Milan doing an awful lot of praying during crisis. This is John Milan, who's been speaking to the Irish Examiner, saying that he's been going into the church quite a bit. He says, at every opportunity I get, I've taken church back into my life. Going back into church, you might ask me, well, what do you believe in? I believe there is a God, and within the last 10 days, 14 days, I've been doing an awful lot of praying. To me, it's interesting what he says here. To me, it's another 40 minutes where you can go into a church and it's just silence and you can just switch off. There's no camera phone. There's no selfies. It's just a lovely 40 minutes where you can go in and don't hear anything. It's a break away from the outside world. And then he says, another place I love going is for a jacuzzi or a sauna. I suppose the two places where you won't see an iPhone or a camera phone or people taking selfies are in a church or in a leisure centre where they have a jacuzzi and a sauna. I love that way of life now, where you can switch off for an hour or 2 hours. So that's John Milan. That's how he's coping during lock-in at the moment. And Cork star Tracy primed and ready to face another battle, writes Owen Cormacan.
I haven't heard anybody compare a jacuzzi to a church before, but there you go. It's a bit of insight into the mind of John Milan. The Irish Times next for me this morning. Australia considered pulling out of November test in Dublin. This is Gavin Cummiskey's story. Autumn international fixtures in Europe could be cancelled as unions look to cut costs. And look, I suppose it does make sense, really, when you think about it. If the Rugby Championship is shelved, obviously we expect the summer tours to be shelved. I don't think that's been formally announced just yet. But would the Northern Hemisphere teams, would the Southern Hemisphere team come to the Northern Hemisphere to do their traditional November tours, or do we just play fixtures that are more obvious fixtures here? I don't know. I suspect that maybe Japan might continue to come and do their tour, given that they won't have any other matches. But if the Rugby Championship is postponed, then they just play the Rugby Championship in the November window, and that would make the most sense, Owen, right?
Yeah, I think that something falls by the wayside, doesn't it, this year in rugby? I don't think you get everything played at this point. I think summer is done and done for good. I would have thought that, like, you just don't obviously have any rugby this year. It's just too much of a test to consider that two different sides of the world can return to a normalish way of life on time together. I just can't see that happening. You've also got a lot of Six Nations fixtures to play. You've also got Champions Cup, potentially Pro 14, although I have my doubts about that, fixtures to get played as well later on this year. It just makes more sense to plan for the more local version of rugby that exists in this hemisphere to get those played at some point this year, and just forget about the prospect of getting anything like this played, because it's like the season is already very, very compact. We would have been having conversations this summer about our players going to be fit enough going to Australia, and I just don't think that this can happen now. I've got the Herald, Philly. This is Sorry.
Sorry, one last point on that, because when you think about it, like, are the IRFU going to make more money from selling out Lansdowne Road for an Australia game than they are for having the rest of the Pro 14 season go? There probably is a tension there where the November internationals are a bit of a cash cow for the unions, and so this might be the Australian union saying, if you're going to make $2.5 million from that, we want our costs covered and extra money. There probably is some negotiation, some horse trading to be done where some of these fixtures might be saved. The RFU, for example, I can imagine them desperately trying to sell out the November internationals because they're absolutely gagging for cash.
Absolutely. So it's a good point, actually. There may be just a bit of a percentage or something that goes to Australia and whoever's travelling up this way in November, if November is a safe enough time to play these games. The Herald, as I mentioned here, also has that Philly McMahon interview. This is a mental test. He says lockdown measures will have a dangerous impact. Clubs could lead GAA return. That's the Wexford GAA story as well. And Jack Grealish has apologised for his actions.
So the Olympics have confirmed that they're going to go ahead in July 2021, and that's the lead story in the back of the Guardian this morning. We can be light at end of tunnel backs Tokyo to succeed as Olympics delayed to July 2021. That's the headline in the bottom piece, and then at least I now have another year to become a better athlete. Taekwondo star Jade Jones on staying positive in the pursuit of history, and Jack Grealish fined and apologises after breaking guidelines. So Jack Grealish has done one of those hostage videos, which we'll play you a little bit later on, where somebody off camera is saying, apologise, or I'll clip you around the ear.
The Irish Daily Mail this morning is autumn date, Ireland's Euro playoff put off to September. So we're starting, as you say, like it is necessary to, I guess, have some semblance of plans in place. And Republic of Ireland's Euro 2020 playoff against Slovakia may not take place until September at the earliest. So the game is obviously fixed for last Thursday. We could have been, that was supposed to be last Thursday. Who knows if we would have still been in proceedings. And then the game was put back to June the 4th. But UEFA chiefs now prepared to defer all 8 playoffs until September or even October, with a decision expected at tomorrow's video conference involving all 55 nations. I know what you're saying, Ger. What about the Nations League? Leinster's Byrne, meanwhile, hoping for May resumption. This seems a tad ambitious again, but I guess if you're a professional athlete, you've got to almost have some sort of date in your head, don't you, to kind of keep yourself in the right mindset. But it's Ross Byrne harbouring hopes of completing the current season despite the indefinite hiatus. He says, "We are hoping that the season can start again in the summer. Maybe towards the end of May, we might be going back in together, and hopefully social distancing and this lockdown will speed the process up a little bit more." He says it'll hopefully give us a chance to play a little bit more during the summer, is what we are hearing. So he's actually probably just saying that May as a potential return date to some form of training and being a proper Leinster Rugby employee by then, rather than actual matches. And Flap Jack says the back of the Mail as well this morning, Grealish issues grovelling apology but left sweating over £80 million United move.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on with the transfer roundup we're going to do for you. The back page of the Star this morning, the Irish Star, bushfires, quarantine in the UAE and making the most of 2 kilometres. That's a Sam Bennett story where 2 kilometres actually is a radius that you can do a 10 to 12 kilometre cycle in pretty easily. They've got a great picture there of Arkle at Talca Park, the day Arkle came to Talca Park, and there's a 2-page story on that inside. The John Fallon story there, FAI finances take a big hit. Gary Owens has highlighted potential effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the FAI's finances, saying that he wrote to all staff yesterday and that they are going to avail of the government initiatives to try and protect jobs, but it looks like they're going to lose loads and loads of money. No coaching courses, which generates about $7 million a year, according to the latest accounts in 2018. So they're facing a very difficult time. And the main story there is gone till September. Ireland's crucial Slovak clash won't happen before the autumn. And they also have the Jack Grealish, I was stupid. So yes, you were, Jack.
Yeah, Jack Grealish, the lead on the back of the Irish Sun this morning. They've gone with a Justin Bieber line. Is it too late now to say sorry? Sports stars in the dock. COVID-idiot 1, Grealish grovels, but United move could be off. And then also COVID-idiot 2, Billy Joe donates 25k but loses fight license. We've also got a story here, National booked in, and in brackets virtually. This is a story people might have seen, that Grand National might be replaced by virtual Grand National, with all proceeds going to help the fight against coronavirus. Here we go. Team is in relation to the Olympics being pushed back by almost exactly a year. It's basically the same dates the whole thing kicks off, and Premier League faces £2 billion call. We'll come back to the football a little bit later on in this morning show.
Okay, so the back page of the London Times, Grealish gets 150 grand fine for stupidity. Aston Villa disciplined star for a late night jaunt, and there's a picture of him there after he was pictured at the scene of an accident in Solihull on Sunday, despite the lockdown. So, and then also Olympics move creates logjam. So apparently the Commonwealth Games, which are due for Birmingham, are facing a bit of a lockdown. I know, Owen, that of all the things that are going on in the world right now, the biggest concern that we've had, and it's been a shared concern, I think, right across you and me and everybody we know, is what's going to happen with the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, the Commonwealth in general and the Commonwealth Games are certainly two things I tend to think about quite a bit. Kind of the dying thoughts before you go to sleep every night, really. It tends to be about the Commonwealth. The London Independent this morning, Olympics set for July 2021. with a picture of Tokyo there and the Olympic rings. Premier League consider isolated camps, writes Miguel Delaney. I presume they carried that in yesterday's paper as well. And Mercedes breathing aid to help virus patients. The Mercedes AMG Formula One team have helped develop a breathing machine that keeps coronavirus patients out of intensive care without the need for a ventilator. So the continuous positive airway pressure device has been developed in under a week alongside engineers at University College London and clinicians at the University College London Hospital, which could alleviate the need for so many ventilators across the country. So the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency has already approved the breathing aid, which is already used in hospitals but is not readily available. And while 40 devices have already been delivered to UCLH and 3 more to other London hospitals, developers say that up to 1,000 CPAP machines can be built per day by Mercedes. So that is certainly quite a contribution from a sporting standpoint.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it goes back to a piece that Kieran Bradley wrote on Off the Ball last week, which maybe we should dig out and put up again. He made the point that never in human history has all of humanity been focused on solving the exact same problem. And I think it was somebody tweeted a link yesterday to some Lithuanian came up with a way of designing a mask that you could mass produce. And I think he either invented it on the Thursday and the Lithuanian government had ordered 1 million of them by the Sunday, and you begin to see just how quickly we can solve problems. The old where there's a will, there's a way, and all those scientists the boffins who work for Mercedes are doing some good work there at the moment. Let's move on to the Telegraph this morning, and they've obviously got that story there. Did you just do the Telegraph?
No, I did the London Independent.
Mercedes stuff as well. Okay, so they've got the same story. And then Grealish, I'm sorry, it's a picture of his white Range Rover. And it's a picture of him outside, and then Aston Villa captain deeply embarrassed over a car accident. Player faces fine as he issues grovelling apology for breaching lockdown. New Olympic dates cause major calendar changes and Lions clash. But the Lions are happy enough with it, obviously. Australia set to deliver 10 million blow to RFU. That's the fact that Australia won't be coming to play England either. So maybe a deal will be done here where money is found to make it worth Australia's while to come and still play those games. And then Newcastle forced to put staff on furlough. So that's Mike Ashley's careful husbandry of Newcastle United continues as he has put those staff basically on unemployment benefits. That is those papers that I have this morning for you.
Just one more for me then. It's just the Irish News this morning. Rates relief for GAA clubs here. So with financial streams from fundraising, lotto, gate receipts, gym memberships and bars all cut off due to COVID-19 lockdown, clubs in Northern Ireland will not have to pay rates for April, May and June this year. You've also got that story, as you mentioned, Tokyo Olympics were scheduled for next year. Belfast boxer Brendan Irvine will lead the Irish charge. His place already rubber stamped. And Croke Park places all employees on furlough. Croke Park taking the reluctant step of placing all its employees on furlough due to the coronavirus pandemic, but the association will make a big effort to retain all staff when the crisis eases or ends. And obviously there's been pay cuts as well reported from Croke Park.
Yeah, so those pay cuts are actually reported by Conor McKeown today in the Independent Group, and fairly significant pay cuts. I think I just don't have the details here in front of me right this second, but I'll get there. If you want to actually talk about the Nicky Rackard story, which I think is being reprinted today.
Yeah, the Wexford People, for anybody living in Wexford who wants to pick up a copy today, it will be worth your while giving it a read because they've printed a story. Nicky Rackard, in his own words, the aftermath of that All-Ireland triumph sent me on the road to an incurable disease. Before he died, Wexford hurling legend Nicky Rackard wrote a series of articles for the Sunday Press, giving an extraordinary insight into his life. In the first of a series, we reproduce the fascinating articles. And I didn't know this, but Nicky Rackard had huge struggles with alcoholism. It seems during his playing days, or at least at the latter end of his playing days anyway, this became a fairly pronounced issue for Nicky Rackard. And there's some really interesting stuff in the article just about how he kind of talks about society and their view of alcoholism at the time, that it is an illness, that the disease isn't really seen as such when he's writing in his own time in Ireland, and it's almost something that you could copy and paste to something in modern Ireland. It's like he says, it's a strange disease. There are thousands of people in Ireland suffering from it, and they don't even know they have it. Yet if they have one drink, the disease will spring into life and take over. There are others who have it, and they know they have it. They know they cannot be cured, but they can live a normal life as long as they stay away from the first drink. And it's interesting. Like he speaks about it in a very intelligent way. Is understands hugely the what alcoholism is and how much of a disease it is and what it has done to his life. And it kind of is tinged with sadness talking about the 1956, I think it's 1956 All Ireland, when Wexford have won the All Ireland. And you get the sense from the first part of this piece that that night was going to become, unfortunately, a fairly significant night in his path to alcoholism, that he hadn't drank for quite some time before that. But that night it was set to change. Now, I presume he's going to go into more detail in it in part 2 of the article, because part 1 really is about his education and picking up a hurl for the first time and playing hurling in St. Kieran's College, where he was a boarder, kind of went to school late at the time, and because he had actually contracted typhoid. And after getting to the school late because of typhoid, he was kind of found it very, very tough on himself. Was perhaps bullied a little bit in school, but then his hurling prowess came out, and the hurling helped him to find a bit of comfort in St. Kieran's. So it's a brilliant piece for anybody who wants to dig it out. Just such a fascinating caricature.
It's an amazing piece, and I think it's a multi-part piece as well. So there's going to be more of it printed by the paper, and like, this is the type of stuff that we should all be reading, especially at this time, because it seems so relevant. Like, the World Health Organization issuing an edict saying maybe boozing through this isn't actually the best way to go about getting through it. But obviously, a lot of people are turning to booze at the moment to get them through this very difficult situation. So, a warning from our past that this is obviously something that you really need to be very careful about. But he hadn't drunk for 5 years. He'd obviously sworn off, I think it was after the death of a friend.
Yeah.
And that's like, one of those sliding doors moments in a person's life, which obviously just goes in a fairly horrific direction for him from that point forward. And like Owen, it's difficult to explain the reverie with. So I would have family, extended family from down the area, and like the absolute reverie within which the records are held. It's like the O'Sheas, right? They're kind of at that level for Kerry football. That's the, except, no, there's been no generation since that has been as good as that generation.
There's always. Sorry, there's always like a couple of things in these pieces, that little nuggets that kind of seem insignificant but always kind of stick out to you after you moved away from the piece. Like, one of them is the fact that he reckons they're the only records in Ireland, or at the time this is the only record family in Ireland, like a Norman name, and he couldn't really trace back beyond his grandfather, which he found a little bit strange because they are the only records. And this just kind of the last thing that kind of really stuck out to me in this is about the attitude of Nicky Rackard, because we hear it so much around this era of hurling about how unbelievably competitive someone like Christy Ring was, and I don't think we hear as much about it from a Nicky Rackard perspective. We always hear about him as a great hurler, but we don't know a whole pile about how dedicated he was to his craft, which I think we all assumed he was, but also how competitive he was. So he talks about the instinct and the desire to succeed, and he says, "I believe this instinct, desire, drive, call it what you will, is a good thing. I have no respect for the competitor who only goes through the motions, but now I feel a surge can be a dangerous thing if it is not kept under control and allowed to reach the proportions of an obsession, especially if carried over from the sphere of sport into job or profession." And I guess this is probably one of the earliest examples we have of a male in Ireland who realises the dangerous capabilities of his own obsession, that having the singular focus of succeeding is hugely important to this guy being one of the best hurlers of all time. But would it be something that would drive him to dark places in his personal life? Perhaps. I just found that a very, very interesting point that he would be able to make.
Yeah, and it's way ahead of its time. It feels like, in terms of dealing with psychology of the psychology of addiction, the stigma associated with the disease, just talking about it as a disease as well. So a great piece, and well done to the Wexford people for digging that out. Just wanted to briefly talk about those cuts in the GAA. So salary cuts of those earning up to €38,000 will be subject to a 10% cut. A 15% reduction will be applied to salaries between 38,000 and 76,000, while any remuneration above that will take a 20% hit. This is so all GAA staff, and did you say 500 employees? Was that the figure? Yeah, this is Conor McKeown saying the change will affect approximately 500 employees either fully or partially paid by Central Council. So the GAA moving very quickly to try and shore up their finances, and some great details in this as well. Last year, Croke Park reported a 22% increase in gate receipts, generating a 6.5 million boost to a figure of over 36 million. And in a wholly unlikely doomsday scenario, the GAA would stand to lose in the region of 60 million if they were unable to stage the All-Ireland Championships this year. Their 2019 financial report showed annual turnover of 118 million, up 11% on the previous year. So they've obviously been very, very well run in recent years, but that's going to be great that they have that to fall back on. But obviously they want games, when it's safe to do so, back up and running fairly quickly. Okay, so it's 11 minutes past 8 here this morning. You're watching OTB AM. Plenty more coming up for you in the next hour. Mickey Quinn, the Crappy Quiz, our football roundup, the Ronan O'Gara, David Humphreys rivalry, and we're back next with our lockdown lowdown.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.